Are you an autistic person who has some support needs where you need to bring in outside help beyond family and friends? Have you ever found yourself vulnerable in that position as an adult with a stranger in your home? The topic of today's video may resonate with you if you have been in that situation, and if you haven't, stay tuned because what I'm about to discuss is a real situation that I encountered, two real situations that I encountered that are part of not the long con like the video before that I made about vulnerability with autistic folks, but this one is really about sort of, if I were to use an analogy, rather than somebody stabbing you to get your blood, this is more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. In my scenario, what happened with me, so one of the support needs that I have is help with cleaning and organization. I have always, I believe, I came out of the womb being from a physical object perspective, not like work and that kind of thing, but like from a physical object perspective, I have always been a very disorganized, kind of clutter sort of person. And I don't like cleaning at all. It's very, very difficult for me right now, partly because of my obesity, but even before, when I was younger, it was the recurring problem I had with my mother when I was a kid and a teenager and a college student. She just couldn't understand why I had such difficulty with any sort of cleaning or tidying up or, anything that even remotely resembled that. And what really exacerbated it was she herself cleaned for a living. She worked for a cleaning service that sort of specialized in insurance claims. So like if somebody would have a fire, she'd be like scrubbing soot off of walls, or a puffback back in the days when oil furnaces were kind of common, when the furnace would puff out and the whole house would end up with soot from the oil furnace having issues. And so I basically told her my whole life that the one job that I basically would feel like is the worst job in the world for me would be to clean. It's that hard for me. And there is definitely an element of PDA, performance demand avoidance, with cleaning, very specific to cleaning and meeting the expectations of somebody else and what they think organization looks like. And so, now being a little bit older, I'm heavier now, but also I struggle with this because I'm very allergic to dust and pet dander. And so, anytime that stuff gets stirred up a little bit, I cough, it triggers asthma issues. And same thing with when I change positions, my blood pressure tends to dip and I get like I'm going to pass out. And it has always been that way. So this is something that I have known for a long time that I needed help with. I can do elements of it, but to like keep a whole house clean is very, very difficult for me. I would say probably of all the support needs I have, that is probably the largest one. And, right now my husband, he really helps a lot, but I went through a period of time where we were both just extremely busy. And so I was married when this happened. I'm going to get a little bit more specific in this video than I did in the last one because it's a little less personal. But essentially, we have throughout the course of a lot of our marriage hired cleaning services or individual people that have a cleaning business to come in, like once a week, once every 2 weeks, clean our house. And I have been very burned. And again, I really do feel like people who are either trying to con other people or scam other people. I think that autistic people, we're an easy mark, and I think people can see it who are con artists. I also think that in this particular situation, I should have taken my own advice I gave in the last video, and that is doing background checks and only using services and not individual people. So this was a situation where we always initiated the contact, and it was usually, what would be like a single person company that, they go to people's homes and they clean them on a regular basis. They have clients, and we have had tremendously bad luck with people that we have hired in the past. It has never worked out well. And part of the reason for that, in hindsight, is that sometimes, and not always, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of really decent, honest people that work for themselves. But sometimes there are people that can't hold down a regular job, and for whatever reason, maybe they can't work 8 hours a day for, health reasons, or, whatever it is. Maybe they have a criminal background and they can't get hired because of it, or, they got out of prison and they can't get hired because of it, or addiction issues in the past and they can't get hired because of it. There's all kinds of reasons that this particular type of single person business can at times have very unsavory people, unsavory characters, if you want to call it that, or people that are not generally the same as if you went through a larger corporate cleaning business. But we were willing to take that risk because the price difference was pretty hefty. And I'm just going to tell you that part of what has contributed to ways in which I have been taken advantage of in the past, especially when I was younger, but this isn't that long ago that I'm talking about it, a handful of years, where I was raised Catholic in a very conservative home. And now I understand that due to my autism, part of why I have had problems with people taking advantage of me in the past is that I have very rigid, black and white, sort of social justice kind of thinking. And I was raised that basically you're supposed to try to be a saint and do the, selfless thing all the time to try to get into heaven and stuff. That's sort of the background I came out of. And so I mistakenly, for a long time, had this understanding of morality that you're supposed to just bend over backwards all the time to accommodate other people and to help other people, especially if they were, they hit hard times or, anything like that, because bad things can happen to any of us. And it's not an unusual thing that people end up in situations that are out of their control. And then all of a sudden, they have to really have a hard time digging out of it. So an example, just to think about something I saw on a show not too long ago. I was watching Netflix, and there was a show on there that I watched basically that was called something like the worst X ever, or the X from Nightmare X or something like that. And there was this lady who had broken up with this man who, the man, to retaliate, had made other people get involved and make false accusations about this woman, and they got her put in prison, and she spent 8 or 9 months in prison, and she was completely innocent. And this whole conspiracy had come out after the fact that none of it happened. And she just basically lost 8 months of her life away from her child and all this stuff. And so I've always been aware that sometimes things happen to people that are not their fault. And so you never know somebody else's story. Always give somebody sort of the benefit of the doubt and try to do right by people all the time. So that's the mindset that I have always had, but it gets me in trouble as an autistic person, because with my autistic way of thinking and the rigidity of that thinking, in real time, I can have a really hard time gauging other people's intentions. When it's truly a situation where something is out of their control, or they made a mistake, but they're trying to like turn their life around or make things better. And I can't sometimes tell that in real time versus somebody who is truly being manipulative or is truly being abnormal with the types of things that they're doing. And so keep that in mind as I talk about some of what's going to come up, because it really plays a huge part of thinking about, now that I'm autistic, and thinking about my rigid thinking and thinking about this sense of like right and wrong and justice and, all this kind of stuff. I, for so many years of my life, really, really, really want to believe what people tell me. Even if it kind of gives me a bad feeling, I want to believe the best in people. And it gets me in trouble. It has gotten me in trouble historically, time and time again. And I honestly believe my autism is part of it. I do. I believe that if I were not autistic, if I was allistic, that to a certain degree, there would be less of this. Now, of course, allistic people can be taken advantage of as well. I mean, it's a numbers game with people with bad intent, right? But in the case of having somebody else in my home, providing a service that is a support need of mine, I have had a few different people, and I'm going to focus on one particular person just for the sake of time, who it started out that she came as part of a company, and then she had a falling out with the other person that she was supposedly in partnership with. And so then she like went out on her own, but she didn't like create an LLC or any kind of company. It's just, she was self-employed, and she sort of did like a cash business, like I'm going to come to certain clients' houses, and I'm going to come and do the cleaning for you. And I should have known something was wrong. I should have known something was wrong, because when that happened, she came to the house and she was like in a crying fit. But me, trying to be a very kind person, I want to believe that people have every right to make a living regardless of their past, and that sort of social justice sort of thing. I was like, well, let me give this lady another chance, because she's clearly upset, and maybe she shouldn't be here cleaning today because she's so upset. But, maybe this is a one-time thing. And it didn't turn out like that again, where she was crying, but it wasn't long before all kinds of abnormal behavior started happening that I was willing to look past, again, because trying to be kind, trying to live a life where I would, give people the benefit of the doubt, and understanding that people make mistakes. A lot of people, myself included, have made a ton of mistakes. And if our feet were held to the fire every time we made a mistake, nobody would ever get out ahead in life, right? That's the mentality that I had. And I still do believe that to a certain extent, but I'm a lot more guarded now. So the second sign that this person should not have been continuing to clean my home is she started to want to come at unscheduled times to clean, because she would be hard up for money. And so she wanted to get her money sooner. So like if she was scheduled on a Saturday, she'd call me up on a Wednesday maybe, or a Thursday, and say, I have my lights are going to get shut off. Can I please come early and clean? It's just going to be this one time. And I let her do it. Unfortunately, once you do that and you start that as a pattern, it's very difficult to pedal back, especially if you have fawning type like behaviors, because I do. If you've not heard of fawning, it's, fight, flight kind of a thing. Well, there's another one called fawn, which is kind of like trying to appease other people as a defense mechanism. So the other mistake I made, and I would really heavily caution any autistic people or anybody with disabilities who's vulnerable in any way not to make the mistake I made. So because my mother was a cleaning person, I grew up with the mentality, because my mom was a good, honest, hard-working person, that if she accidentally had a nickel stuck to her shoe and got home and realized it didn't belong to her, she'd turn around and drive and give it back. Like, she was as straight as an arrow as they come. But she would always talk about how she always really appreciated it when she cleaned, when she didn't have somebody breathing down her neck. When somebody could just trust, especially if she had been there repeatedly, that she would just clean and not be like watching everything she did. And, things like offering her something to drink and giving a tip and all of these types of things. It was just sort of par for the course that she would talk about this sort of stuff throughout my entire childhood. And so when I had cleaners at the house, I tried to do the same thing. And I am telling you, do not have this attitude. Had I done that, the opposite of what I'm saying, I would have not run into these problems. But I was not watching her closely. I cared about the end result. I wanted a clean house. She was coming when I was busy doing other things. So I'd be in one room doing something and she'd be in another room. And as long as the room ended up clean, that was really all I cared about, because I assumed that she was going to be honest and, everything. And I would say that if you have somebody in your home helping you with something like this, if you don't feel comfortable, have another household member or a friend, especially when the individual in your home is in an area where you have valuable things or personal things, like a bedroom, if you've got a room where you keep, things that would normally be put in a safe, things like that. So things started showing up missing, but I was never completely sure if I should or could accuse her because of how I am with physical objects. I lose things all the time. I'm very disorganized with physical objects. And it's not uncommon that I end up buying multiple copies of the same thing because I'll misplace something and then I'll never be able to figure out what I did with it. And so I go to the store and I buy another one. And then all of a sudden I end up with 8 ice cream scoops, kind of a thing. That's fictitious. My ice cream scoop goes in a particular place, but with other things. So there was a time when I bought a ring from a pawn shop that wasn't particularly expensive or anything, but I liked the setting. And it went missing, and I didn't accuse her or anything like that because I thought, well, there is at least a chance that I misplaced it, and, maybe that's just the case. But years later when I moved, I found out, no, it truly, I don't own this ring anymore. It's not in any of my possessions, and I am 100% certain that it was stolen. The other thing that she started to do would be, she'd say, oh, well, I'm going to come with my supplies. And then she would forget her supplies. And I'd have to go to the store and buy things that she had agreed in advance that she was going to bring. Well, that put me in the position of either having to give her cash and waiting, or I go and I know I can run really quickly to like the store, a third of a mile away and grab whatever it was. And again, I should have been stricter about that and basically said, if you're either, I need to supply this stuff all the time and that's the agreement we're going to have, or you need to supply this stuff every time and that's the agreement we're going to have, because not only is this inconvenient, but then I was leaving this person in my house, and my husband was home too. But again, not wanting to breathe down her neck, things were happening that shouldn't have. She also, at one point, had her teenage daughter show up to help her to clean, but the daughter had a toddler with her. And that is one time when I said, this cannot happen again. I should have said at that time, no, you guys can't even clean right now, because I was really scared that if the kid got hurt, we lived in a place that had 2 very large sets of stairs. It was a townhouse and it was just straight up and down stairs, 3-story place. And I thought, oh man, if this kid falls down the stairs, I'm going to have all this liability. So I should have just said right out, you can't come here with the kid. You didn't ask permission. You can't do it. But instead what I did was I said, this is a one-time thing. If you show up with the kid again, we're done. And that is something that she honored. But again, I was too wishy-washy with it because I wanted my house cleaned, right? I didn't want to have to wait until this woman could come to my house again. And I was mad, but I put up with it, and I should not have. Then she started to want an advance, where again, excuses about things, or one time she had a relative who was supposedly in prison and she needed money in advance because this person needed money for whatever they needed money for. And it got to be more and more outlandish for a while. And I put my foot down after a while and I said, look, all of these things can't continue. You have to act like every other professional that would come and clean a house. We agree upon a time, you show up, you clean, I pay you the agreed upon rate, you leave, and that's all it is. And like the last video, I'd kind of gotten to know this woman, or at least what she portrayed of herself to me, and had, she would clean and I'd be talking to her while she's cleaning and stuff when she was in the room I was in, and I let that muddy what was really going on, because, it's just, I have a big blind spot when it comes to social communication and understanding the nuances of all that. And I've gotten better as I've gotten older. Don't get me wrong. There's a learning curve, right? And I'm going to continue to learn and grow in that. I'm telling this story so that if anybody's thinking of hiring somebody that's going to be in their home, that you can learn from my experience. There was a time, however, that really was the ending point of the relationship, because it stopped being the whole I want blood by 1,000 cuts sort of thing with all these little transgressions, as opposed to something larger. But for a very good period of time, when I was stern and said, no, you're not going to be able to continue to clean for me unless this is like a normal business relationship, she, for many months, sort of turned herself around and was doing exactly what I had asked of her. So we decided that after many months of her acting, quote unquote, business professional in terms of her behavior, we went to New York City for a long weekend in 2019 for the Dimash concert. And we only needed somebody to be in our house a couple of times because it was a very short trip, because we have cats. And we thought, well, if we have to, at the time we had 4 cats, and if we have to board 4 cats, that's going to be really expensive. Let's just have this person that was cleaning our home, let's just ask her to come in and clean and, give her a key, and she can she can come in every day while we're gone a couple of times, because we had somebody else that would normally come in and do this, and he was not available. Somebody that was a more trusted person. But because she had turned her behavior around and was acting in a more professional way, we decided that we were going to do this. We came back and the cats were fine. The house was clean. Everything was peachy keen. And then one day, several weeks later, I was flipping through, my husband rather was flipping. No, it was me. It was a joint checking account. I want to say it was one that I normally kept on me, but I had put a new, what do you call it? Not a box of checks, but like a book of checks in my checkbook. I was still writing checks for certain things, even all the way up to 2019. And I have carbons. And I flipped through it and it just felt weird. And wouldn't you know, there was one check that had been written in the middle of the book, and it was the strangest looking check ever. I'll explain that in a moment. But it was written and dated while we were in New York, which I think is stupid. If you were going to try to get away with something, why would you date it for the same period of time I was gone? But criminals are not always smart. So, and it was for a small enough amount of money that, I was in the habit of once every week, once every 2 weeks, logging into the bank account. This was an account that I always had certain things coming out of. It wasn't something that had variable things like utilities and stuff that are different every month. But I had gone maybe 2 weeks without checking it really closely. And it was a couple $100 check that had been written and cashed and honored by the bank. And it was the stupidest thing. When you have a little line that you're supposed to sign with a check. I have a pretty long name, and I my legal name is kind of long. Lots of letters in my last name. So when she wrote this check out, she wrote Jennifer, and Jennifer took up almost the entire line. And then she wrote the first 2 letters of my last name, and the whole rest of the last name went all the way up the side of the check. Nobody would ever write a check like that out of their own checkbook, because they know how long their own name is, and they're not gonna do that. And so I was mad that the check was cashed, but it was not cashed at the bank where I do business. So, my financial institution had no choice other than to honor it, because I was gone. I didn't know that this check had been written, and it was not written to herself. It was written to somebody else, and I couldn't make heads or tails of who that person was. But we found it, and we had to change account numbers and make a claim with the bank and all this kind of stuff that there had been fraud. And of course, after it happened, I was like, absolutely not. This person's never coming into my house again. We're going to change the locks and, all of that. But it goes to show how, again, and I only say this because I want it to help other people. I think there is something inherently obvious to people that have bad intentions and who take advantage of people on the regular, of when there is a person who is vulnerable for whatever reason. And my vulnerability in this whole thing, again, was the combination of me being autistic and not knowing it, and the rigidity in the idea of what kindness and fairness and giving somebody chances in life is all about. And so this is not the only time that that particular combination of rigid thoughts around morality has gotten me in trouble and taken advantage of. I'm not going to go through every scenario and make a video about it, but this is the easiest one that I can explain in terms of watching out, because it was specific to a support need that I had. I wouldn't have called it a support need at the time because I didn't know I was autistic, but I've known my entire life that cleaning my whole house top to bottom is just something that if I do it, I can't function in other areas of my life. Like, I only have so much energy, and I can either spend that energy having a job, or I can spend that energy taking care of a house, and I can't do both. I don't have the energy for both. I am not wired to have the energy for both. And I don't have children. And part of the reason I don't have children is a conscious choice, because I know that I don't have the energy to have children, especially young children. I think that the designation of being low support needs, if I had a young child when I was assessed, I probably would not have come out quite the same in my assessment, because, part of the reason I was deemed low support needs in the assessment is because I've always held a full-time job. But there is absolutely no way that I could clean a house, take care of finances, work a full-time job, take care of a kid. I know that people struggle to do that who don't have any sort of disability and are neurotypical. It's a lot, especially when we're in this individualistic kind of society in the US where, it takes a whole village to raise a child, unless you're in the Western, developed nations, especially the United States, where you're expected to be able to do all this on your own. And add to that, I haven't talked about this on other videos, but my parents have both passed away. My husband's parents have both passed away. We've both lost at least one sibling and siblings-in-law. We were both born late in life to our parents. My husband is older than I am. He's about 10 years older than I am. And so we don't have other support people to fall back on. Like, I have to work a job. He has to work a job. There's not this fallback of, if something would happen, we could move back in with our parents or something. So, and we've been that way for a while. I was in my early 30s when the passing away of our parents began, and it happened in quick succession within just a handful of years. There was person after person dying. And I bring all of that up to say that even though I didn't know I was autistic, I knew that I had limitations in terms of what I could do with the amount of energy I have as a human, that I'm wired to have. And I've always been high masking, and that takes a ton of energy to do. And so if a person's masking all day long at a job and it's taking up all your energy, but you have to have a clean house. You can't just live in such a way that you're going to get sick and your pets are going to get sick and, all that kind of thing. So it was a true support need that I had at the time and continue to have, though my husband has been fantastic about stepping up and doing that kind of stuff where I need help. So the parting idea I want to leave you with in this video, in this concept of people that if you leave them in your life, will try to take advantage with 1,000 paper cuts versus a stab, is to understand that, particularly if you are somebody that does not live with, say, a parental figure, if you're an adult who's either living on your own or living with the help of a support person popping in and helping with things, or you're in some sort of a romantic relationship where you have a support person or you have a family member that comes over and helps, basically any situation where you have a measure of independence, where you're not living where your support needs are so high that, you have to have help to that degree. And that's all valid if you do need that help. But this message is more aimed at people that are trying to run a household and need help with aspects of that. And so if you find yourself in that situation, know that, number one, not everybody's your friend. Number two, not everybody has your best interest in mind. This is going to sound kind of harsh, but only you have your own best interest in mind. You can't rely on anybody else outside of very close friends and family to ever have your best interest in mind. And number three, you have the right to tell somebody, this is not working out. We're going to part ways. You go do what you do with other clients, but this is not what I need in my life right now. Being assertive in that way is really hard for me. It's something that I've worked my entire adult life to try to become better at, because not only do I have this sort of rigid thinking about what I'm supposed to be doing, because I was raised with this idea of you're supposed to be a saint and strive for perfection all the time, and you're supposed to be better than everybody else in terms of what you're able to do, and from a morality standpoint, this was just it was a nonstop theme in my household growing up, that I was supposed to be the kindest of the kind people. I was supposed to be the most generous of generous people. And on and on. At the end of the day, though, believing things in that way, with that rigidness, essentially was me willingly putting blinders on my eyes and saying, I'm going to ignore what my intellect tells me is not a good situation. So if you are because I'm married, I have a husband, we would talk about this together. And we would ping pong back and forth about the pros and the cons of keeping this person as a cleaning person in our home, that would come in with regularity to clean our house. And not only can you seek the opinion of outside people, but you should. And I would advise that you make a schedule with yourself or with other people in your household, that if you are going to have people in your home on a regular basis with any kind of support needs, that you have some sort of a monthly or a quarterly evaluation, again, within your household. I'm not saying that I would bring the cleaning person into the conversation, but have some sort of a conversation on a regular basis that's scheduled, monthly, quarterly, whatever you think is going to meet your needs, to say, is this person and is this service still meeting my needs as is? And if it's not, is this something that can be rectified with a few simple changes, or is there something else going on that we should just cut ties with this person? Because once you schedule it, there's not the guilt or this sort of, well, I'm not being kind anymore because I'm kicking this person out. It's, you go into it with the knowledge that, no, this person has to be evaluated, and the way that they are meeting support needs of mine has to be evaluated on a regular basis. And if you want to think about this in a more professional setting, I was a teacher for 3 years. And when I was a teacher, when I was an education professional, I was evaluated on a regular basis, just like every other teacher there was evaluated on a regular basis, just like any other person in any other job goes through some sort of an evaluation process, whether it be annually, every 6 months, every quarter, whatever that cycle is of being evaluated. Everything from teachers' aides that were helping with, kids that have disabilities, whether it was the janitorial staff, whatever it was, everybody there was being evaluated on a regular basis, including the support staff, including the teachers. And so if you have a child who's autistic and you leave that child in the hands of a school district or a school system, you can feel safe and have assurance that your child is going to be taken care of as long as the school district is doing what it's supposed to do. And that if there are things that are lacking, that there is an evaluation process and there is an IEP process if the kid has disabilities, and there is a process by which there are reprimands and consequences if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. In any kind of formalized, employment in the US, if you're like a W-2 employee, this is a thing, right? So if we would do that for an autistic child, autistic children grow up. And so, in my opinion, whether you're doing it for yourself as an autistic adult with people that are helping with your support needs, or you have an autistic adult person who has higher support needs that you're a support person for to help them with this process of making sure their needs are met. If we would do it for a kid in a school, we should do it for an adult in mainstream life. And so looking at it that way, it's very much an easier thing for me to see that it is a professional decision, that this is a professional person in my home providing a service that's supposed to be acting a certain way, that's going to be evaluated, all of that kind of stuff. And I have a much, much easier time within that framework because not only is it systematic, not only is there a pattern, not only is it planned, but doing it on a regular basis and having it planned for, you can step away from the emotional aspect of it and say, well, it's June, beginning of the month. This is when we were planning on doing an evaluation of is this service still meeting the needs of the individual who has the disability. And it doesn't feel cold. It doesn't feel unkind. It doesn't feel like I'm having to be mean to somebody. It helps me put on the hat, if you will, of saying, okay, I'm spending my hard-earned money on a service. I need to evaluate if I need that service. And by the way, I'm going to say this for non-support services as well. I'm finding myself having to do this with all kinds of other things I spend money on too. Like, so many subscriptions, everything's gone to a subscription model anymore, right? Where it used to be you just paid for something and you owned it. Now everything's on a subscription model. And so I have to go through every month and look at my bills and say, I have to evaluate, do I still need this subscription for this, that, and the other thing? Because if I'm not using it, I need to stop it because I'm wasting my money. It's just coming out of my bank account every month and I'm not using it to the fullness of what it was intended for. So just an example. So we have a movie subscription thing where we go to the movie theater and you can go to as many movies as you want, one a day. And my husband goes all the time and he gets his money out of that 10 times over. But I don't. And so I'm like, oh, I have to cancel this. And I haven't, because I'm like, well, if I want to go to a movie, it's going to feel like I'm spending all this money if I have to buy a full price ticket if I want to go to the movie with him. So, like, I have to go through and follow this same sort of a regular basis scheduled thing, but think of entertainment like it's a need. To say, okay, if I have so many dollars that I'm going to allocate to my entertainment, because entertainment is a need as much as it can be leisure, you know, is it still meeting my needs? So that's the parting piece of advice in the video. If you're finding this type of content helpful, like, subscribe. I'm glad you've watched. Take care.